Mm. Thank you, Jason. All right. So, there's a lot of wood around the church, a lot of extra wood. A lot of wood around my house. There's some wood that we had in our old house that we moved to our new house. I didn't know what we were going to use it for in the old house. I don't know what we're going to use it for in the new house, but Summer told me she wanted me to bring it because it was perfectly good wood. So now we moved it, and now it's in the new house. And I thought for a while that I thought, wouldn't it be impressive if I took some of that spare wood and built, I know the scripture says barns, right? But in the modern, in the modern equivalent, what we're talking about, storing up grain, storing up food, in the modern equivalent, really what we're talking about are silos. That makes more sense for how we understand this sort of food storage system. Wouldn't it be cool if I did? I realized I actually don't know anything about building. I could say silos, barns, doesn't matter. Building. I don't really know anything about building. My wife reminded me of this as I was trying to brainstorm with her how I might do this. She said, that really, as my grandma would say, I have other gifts. And so I put this one together out of something that was really easy, which is good in a couple of ways, because one, this scripture isn't really about building, even though that is the premise that Jesus uses to tell the story. Not really about building, it's really about economics. We'll get into that in just a minute. Two, I don't really have a big enough table to put anything bigger than this on it, right? The table's relatively small. This fit pretty well, so it works for this demonstration purpose, for the visualization. And three, the time I might have spent yesterday trying to build something that was probably not going to come together anyway, instead I spent it taking my daughters to Dittmer's farm. Dittmer's orchard. Yeah. And it's good that we had a lot of fun. I'm glad we went. But it's good that when we went to Dittmer's orchard, I'm glad that I know more about economics than I do about building. Because while Dittmer's is definitely better in this sense than Vala's, which is where I lived closer to this, I lived really close to this time last year, there is something to be said for the fact that if you go on the website of Dittmer's and you look up how much it will cost to take your kids to Dittmer's orchard, the cost that they tell you online has nothing to do with what it will actually cost you to take your children to Dittmer's orchard. Because the $10 farm fee that it costs to be able to do all the things there has nothing to do with the special drinks that are available, that will cost extra, or the special donuts that you smell the minute you walk in the door. The first thing you pass by is the bakery where they're actually baking the special donuts. Has nothing to do with the cost of actually getting pumpkins in the pumpkin patch or picking apples out of the apple orchard. And as was the thing that hung us up this time, has nothing to do with the cost of getting your face painted at the little face painting stand in the cafe or in the bar there. So as we were sitting there at the bar or in the bar section, having our special drinks and eating our special donuts, you're getting ready to go out and get a pumpkin. I said, no, we're not going to pay another $20 to get our faces painted. Not this time. Now, my girls have gotten pretty good about asking the right questions when it comes to trying to get me to pay for something that they know I'm not volunteering to pay for. Used to be they would ask me, Dad, can we go get our faces painted? And something you need to know about me, when I was growing up, money was tight. Then There are times I can remember going to sleep like in the living room, huddled around the only box fan in the house because the air conditioning was out. I grew up in Phoenix, for those of you who don't know. So that's like, it's like going to sleep like huddled around the space heater because in the winter time here because the heating system is out, right? Like that's, hey, we all have stories in our childhood about getting through hard times. Also, that's the kind of thing as a parent that makes you feel a little anxious, right? You don't want your kids to have to go through that sort of thing. So I grew up feeling some anxiety about money. I never want my kids to feel anxious about money. So when they say, Dad, will you pay for me to get my face painted? I never tell them I don't have the money for that because I've got $20. I tell them I don't have money I don't have face painting money with me, right? I didn't bring face painting money. In other words, the $20 that I have isn't earmarked for that. Well, it turns out they've gotten better at asking questions that get to the heart of the matter. They now ask me, Dad, do you have $20? And when we're out and about and they ask that question, I know before I answer, I better look around and see what they have been around that cost $20. Because that is never just I want to say that my kids don't fully understand economics. They don't get that just because I've got $20 in my pocket or, in the bank because because I could swipe my card and $20 would go through on my debit card, that doesn't mean that $20 isn't budgeted for something else, right? They don't understand budgets or the fact that there are bills that have to be paid. But maybe they do understand something about economics that I've forgotten. And that is, if the money's there, then everything is just a matter of priorities. They're not asking whether or not I have $20 of face painting money. That's a secondary question. They're asking, do you have $20? Because if the answer is yes, then we can begin the negotiations. Then they start asking questions about, Dad, how many times did you buy coffee this week? All right, now you're meddling, kid. Right? They're not wrong about the economics of the situation. They just haven't learned to make all the assumptions about money that I've learned to make in the world around us. This isn't a story about building, because in ancient Israel, barns were for the people, for the farmers of the time, really for the landowners of the time. Barns were what dollar bills or bank accounts are for us today, right? The idea was when the Israelites inherited the promised land, all of the land was divided up amongst 11 of the 12 tribes. The priestly tribe didn't get any land. They had to depend on anybody who this is my theory, anybody who gets to stand up before the community and say, "Thus saith the Lord," has to turn around and say, "Now will you please help provide me my daily bread?" It's part of the balance of the community. I get to stand up here and say, God has told you, you best not do what you've been doing. But I best do it in a way that doesn't ruin community. Because if I do, I better be able to eat off I better be able to fill my belly off of my righteousness. We have to stay in community even as we hold each other accountable. That's beside the point. This is a story about how all the land was divided up among the 11 tribes, and then amongst the 11 tribes, they divided it up amongst the families. Everybody had land, and so as you reaped, as you went about your life, you were in theory supposed to have what you needed in order to feed your family, take care of your family. And if you know anything about farming, I know I've heard stories, some of you grew up on farms. You know that having a barn or a silo, having some way of storing grain or storing food is not a bad thing. In fact, it is a necessary part of agrarian life. You need to be able to store some seed crop for the coming year, right? You can't eat everything that you produce or sell it all because otherwise you'll have nothing to plant the coming year. You have to have enough to get you through the non-growing season, because there are seasons of growing and seasons where the fields lie fallow, and you need to be able to feed your family through those non-growing seasons. You need to be able to put something aside for those times. So having a barn, having a silo, that is necessary. But if we have that as a way of storing up extra, and then we get that filled, and we decide, what if rather than just needing a little extra to get me through this lean time that I had planned for, what if there's a 7-year famine like happened to the ancient Israelites when they had to move into the land of Egypt? You know, they ended up as slaves generations later because they weren't prepared for that 7-year famine. What if I need to save up for 7 years? And really, once you open the door to that, who's to say not 77 years? Who knows? I come from a state that's in the middle of a 30-year drought. Who's to say how much you might need? You know, dollars, bank accounts, you can't eat that stuff. You can't build a house from it, not literally. So why does it have value? Because it is a way that we have invented to say, I will sell this to you, and you don't have to give me food for it because I can't eat all that much food right now anyway. I want something that says that I can take it and use it to buy food later. It's security for later on. Same kind of thing. Bigger barns, bigger silos. Nothing wrong with having a barn. And this might sound like a story of bad timing. This guy finally hits his goal, decides maybe this time, maybe just this once, I'm going to set a bigger goal. Maybe he really had a reason, something going on, that he needed a bigger goal. Maybe he expanded his family, and so the goal that he had before just isn't big enough. Maybe that's it. And so bad timing just happens to be that as he hits that point, God says, now, tonight, your life is demanded of you. You'll never get to enjoy the fact that you have finally accomplished what you had to accomplish, filled your barns. But I think the point of the story is when we get caught in that loop of thinking we've achieved and yet it isn't enough, maybe we just need to find that next level of achievement, that next thing, that it will never be enough. Filling that barn will never be enough. If we aren't satisfied with what we have, with meeting our goal, satisfaction isn't something that isn't a reactionary thing to what happens around us. It is a preemptive thing that starts when we decide to be satisfied. And so the story is not one of bad timing. The story says whenever God shows up, this man will find himself just on the cusp of, just shy of having achieved what he needed to achieve in order to be happy. Because if we don't find happiness where we are, we will always be so close, almost there, right around the corner. And so what do you do? What do you do if you meet your goal? You have what you used to think was enough, and then you find you got a little bit extra, and maybe I could start on that next goal. I don't know anything about building silos or barns or really building anything, but that doesn't mean that I don't make things. Some of you know I love to make food. This is what I make. I love to cook. And so when I hear this story, I wouldn't know how to build a bigger barn to begin with. But what I know is what's life-giving for me is making food, feeding my family. But if I was so worried about feeding my family that I was never willing to share the food that we have with others, invite other people to my table, that would be a huge piece of what gives me joy that just never fully formed in my life. And so when I think about the idea of tearing down barns and building bigger ones, I think, what a waste of wood. What if, instead of building bigger barns with all that wood, we took the time to maybe expand our table, create new opportunities to take that food that we've been blessed with and say, maybe if I have my daily bread, maybe what I've got left over isn't my tomorrow's bread or my monthly bread or my annual bread or my retirement bread. Maybe it's the daily bread for my neighbors. Maybe it's the daily bread for the strangers in my midst. Maybe it's the daily bread for my enemies. Thou preparest a table for me in the presence of my enemies. And the more enemies I have, maybe the bigger that table needs to be. I don't know. I'm not an expert. But what I do know is God calls us to a vision of enough. And once we achieve that vision, everything else we have isn't an extra blessing for us. It may be the blessing that God has for our neighbor.